For today's video, I'm gonna show you how to troubleshoot and repair non-inverter aircon. The complaint of this aircon is not cooling, so there is power on the compressor, but the blower and the condenser fan is not functioning, or no normal operations we seen. So we will see if how we can solve this problem. So let's see. We need to start first the aircon, so that we know if what is the problem. So when we start, we notice that there's no the only function is the compressor, but the blower and the condenser fan is not functioning. So maybe there's a problem in the capacitors. The capacitors is the dual uh, type of capacitors, no? So as you see, we need to get first the terminal of the fan motor, then the terminal also of the compressors. So we're going to get that first, then condemn it to get another one capacitors of the ones. So that three wires, uh, yellow, blue, and black, is for the connections wire from the compressors of the unit. So we say that the common starting and running of the compressors. Then that five wires, black, brown, blue, yellow, and green, that's a connection wire from the fan motor of the window type unit. So we are going to condemn, bypass it. We have to direct start if what is the problem, why when we start the unit for testing there's no respond. So we need to fix this first, why only compressor is running but the fan motor is not running. So the problem we see is effective dual type capacitor. So that's why we provide individual capacitors. The fan capacitors we provide is 2.5 microfarad. Then the compressors capacitor is 25 microfarad. So that's it. We need to individualize the fan and compressors capacitors. We're going to use that for to run the system, to run the fan motor and the compressors. So that's it. The problem is fan capacitors. We need to change it because the fan capacitor is changing value. Then on the unit for testing. Okay, it's so personal now. So the only problem is the fan capacitors, or and then dual type of capacitors, wherein the fan capacitors is defective. Only compressors connections of capacitors is still functioning. So we're going to change the fan capacitors to individualize. Let's say capacitors for compressors and fan capacitors from fan motor is separate. We get the 3.0 ampere of the window type aircon. So we have to use the capacitor, and you see that the condenser fan is functioning. Then we get the ampere of 3.0 ampere. So the capacitor will be put in the black wire of the line wire from the supply. So that's wire we are going to get there, and the ampere. So after getting that ampere, so you see the fan capacitor, the blue, yellow, and brown. the yellow and brown is the line neutral wire, wherein the blue is came from the running capacitor of common. So that's the supply um, wire from the capacitors of the compressors. You see that there's out of air in the air outlet. So we have also a reading of 3.25 ampere or 3.26 ampere, and still that unit is functioning. So the only problem is the fan capacitor. We noticed that there is operations of compressor, but the fan capacitor, but the fan blade and the lower fan of the evaporator is not functioning. So we only have declared only once defective, that the fan capacitor is not maybe change value of the dual type capacitor. So we must have to condemn to change the fan capacitors. You see that there's two capacitors. So yes, that's the connections, the blue from dual type capacitors going to single type fan capacitor. The value of fan capacitor is 2.5. So that dual type capacitor is 25 plus 2.5 UF or microfarad. So we have to separate the capacitors of the unit. So that's the fan capacitors. The value of that is 2.5 fan capacitors. So that's the only problem why the unit is not functioning normally. Especially we notice that only the compressor is running or operational, but the fan blade and blower fan is not functioning or not rotating its functions. So we need to change these fan capacitors. Okay, we almost done repair for this unit. Then we conclude that defective parts is the fan capacitor. So we need to individualize or separate the fan capacitors to the dual type of capacitors, because the dual type capacitor is still good. So we need to provide another fan capacitors for to functions again the fan motors of the unit. That's why we are going to provide another fan capacitors which has the value of 2.5 microfarad. So maybe the problem is the fan capacitors of the dual type is changing value. That's why it is defective fan capacitors. Before you install or before you rewiring this unit, especially when it comes to dual type of capacitors, then we need to change it to single type of capacitors. When it comes single type, only the compressors will be connected, only wire of the compressors connected to the capacitors or running capacitors, which is the 25 UF microfarad. And then the fan motor separately has only one fan capacitor, which is which has a value of 2.5 microfarad. So that is not we need to study first before we rewiring the fan motor and compressors of the unit. So much better to study first, get to enroll, or else you will have a self study about this rewiring of compressors and fan motor wiring. So we got the 3.02 ampere of the carrier window type unit. So it still normally functions now, and the only defective is, and the only defective and problem is the capacitors of the fan motor. So that's it. You see the yellow and brown color of wire and the blue. So that's common wire of blue from rod capacitor goes to fan capacitors supplied to the yellow line of the capacitors, which is the neutral line, and the brown line is the line wire from the fan motor. So that's all. I hope you enjoy and learn about techniques and tips on how to rewiring or condemn startup window type unit for not functioning the fan motor, but we only noticed that the compressors is functioning and the fan motor is defective. Thank you and God bless.
Three point two.